Art Gallery, and to the third and final lunchtime lecture for this semester. Our speaker today is Associate Professor Nilgün Olguntürk from the Interior Architecture and Environmental Design Department. She is the acting chair of that department. And our subject is colour in the built environment. I'll start things off very briefly with a few words about Dr. Olguntürk, but I shall try and keep things as short as possible. Nilgün received her bachelor's degree in architecture from Gazi University in Ankara, and then she moved to METÜ for her master's. She did her PhD in the year 2000, I think.
Yes, here, yes.
So she's Bilkentli.
Yeah.
And then spent a brief time in METÜ teaching before going over to the UK, which is why I like her very much, of course. And why we have the nice English orthography.
Yes, exactly.
She worked as research fellow in the London South Bank University and also as research in the National Health Service and the Department of Transport, Local Government and Regions. So sort of practical as well as theoretical and academic experience of designing spaces and colour and so on. She returned to Bilkent in 2004 and she's been the acting chair of her department since last year and was recently promoted associate professor, so congratulations there. Her research interests include colour perception, colour preference and colour design in interiors, which is the subject of our discussion today. Please make sure your phones and other devices are switched off or to silent mode so we don't interrupt the talk. And I'm sure we'll have some time for questions at the end to discuss the contents of her presentation. Now, I could talk until I were blue in the face, but I'm sure you would all see red if I did that. And after the talk, I'm sure we shall all be green with envy about how great the talk is. Okay, that's enough bad jokes from me. This colourful talk, I sure will entertain you all. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for... Thank you all for coming here. And yes, today I want to talk about color. And a definition of color for architects, interior designers, is actually anything and everything. It's an inherent property of materials and an inseparable component in design, which means that when we are selecting anything like a wall color, a material to the floor, we immediately make a color choice adjacent to it. Those chairs, somebody decided them to be in color red. So any kind of thing in the built environment that we do, any choice, any material choice, translates itself into color immediately, and that's why it's an inseparable component in design. With the years of research and practice I've done in color design, I came to find out that there's a difference between small-scale spaces and big-scale spaces in how color is perceived and used by its users, by the people. In small-scale spaces, the emotional aspects of color become more important. And in larger spaces, the functionality of color, like accessibility or wayfinding, becomes more important to the users. So I'll try to put perspective on those issues with different building types, and I'll start with small-scale spaces and with color emotion. There's huge literature behind the topic color emotion. And most of the studies, this is a compilation of studies that their research work that try to find out the associations of colors, but in isolation, meaning that they're not contextual, they're not related with a space or an object or anything. So they try to figure out like what pink, which emotion in isolation and out of context that entity would make people feel. And the interesting thing on this compilation of research is basically they're the positive emotions and negative emotions. And many of the colors, like red, has both positive and negative emotions associated to it. So the interesting thing is, this took me like 10 years to come here to color emotion subject because it's very difficult. Many people kind of suggests like, okay, yeah, don't use red in your rooms because it will make you nervous, or use green in your rooms because blah, blah, blah. And those things are not exactly that simple. We cannot really solve huge emotional kind of outcomes, have emotional outcomes out of single hues only, because many of them have both negative and positive emotions associated to them. So what came out from that is we designed research, and we had a small living room painted in different colors. We used red, green, blue, and then we used a gray color, and gray is an achromatic color. It doesn't have a hue in it. It's colorless, doesn't have color in it. So usually in some of the research work I'm I'm using gray as a control to check if there's a difference between having a hue, a color, and have no color at all. So black, white, and grays are colorless. And I'll come to the issue of gray. I call it the curious case of gray in this instance. But basically, we had our participants to match a single room being viewed at one time, and they would just make matches with Ekman's facial expressions, which are related to basic emotions of people. Try to find out if color in space would relate to different emotions. What came out is the red room had responses of disgust and happiness. So as you can see, like both positive and negative feelings were associated with it. The green room was more on the happy side. Everybody liked green, and they kind of stated that the happiness, emotion of happiness, was most appropriate for a green room. Where in the literature we also have some negative aspects came out with isolated colors. This is like color in context because it's related to a space. And for the blue room, it was found more neutral. The gray room, why it was so interesting for me in this research, it turned out not to be a control set. It became a color on its own. People in context did not regard gray as an achromatic area. They regarded gray as a color on its own, although it's hueless. And they found it disgust, neutral, or sadness. So it's like kindly a bit on the kind of negative side to it, which I found also an interesting thing on its own. So, yeah, isolation and small spaces where colors affect us most. And prisons is one of the works that we have done also in the UK. And the literature says that lack of variety in color, lighting, and even surface texture for users in isolation may cause depression, lead to understimulation, alienation, and aggressive behavior. So that was what was been said in the literature. What came out was this was a safer custody project. We were approached from the Home Office that because of the, let's say, monochromicity of the environment, having everything the same color, every texture being the same, every single thing being the same, people were having aggressive behavior and mostly depression out of it. So, of course, I'm not a psychologist. I wouldn't know exactly the clinical aspects to it, but we decided that it's worth looking into and see what's going on and what can we do to kind of put some more variety in the visual field of people. So we developed a color scheme, and we had some strategies doing that. One of them, the first one, was enhancing quality materials that are already in the building. So if there's something, some nice thing, some material in the building, we just kept that there. And we found out that basically it's the understimulation that was caused by having all gray, monochromatic, all gray, black, gray environments that people were suffering from because they were just seeing that all through the day and no colors at all. So for that, it seems like we have a need to be exposed to different colors during our daytime or living. It's not, the literature doesn't say why, but there's something about, it's a need. We need to see different colors. Part of the problems in, for example, northern countries and Scandinavian countries is also because of the same color of light this time. They also have higher depression levels. So we human beings need that. So we decided to have huge differences between the living environments and the associated environments that people would go through during the day. So if they're going to some place, the corridors would be a different color, and then another space would be a different color. So they could be exposed to different colors during different times of the day. So to achieve visual stimulation. This was very much liked by the inmates. Another thing that was kind of slightly problematic that we tried to improve was the sanitary fittings in the cells. So they need to be different from furniture, table, and bed colors so that they have a psychological divide between sanitary use and their everyday use of other furniture. So those were the three big topics that we developed and implemented in 6 different prisons at the time. So yes, I'm going to move to public spaces now. And moving from like those emotional and need of stimulation with color to a more kind of concrete use of color in the sense of wayfinding or accessibility. Because when the spaces got bigger, the color's effect to us emotionally seems to be slightly decreasing. And this time we are using color for our more on its functional basis to find our way, to determine landmarks, to do something with it. And for transport environments are basically train stations, airports, bus stations, tube stations, all those kind of where people go from A to B. And many of those spaces are really monochromatic and all grays and blacks and whites all the time. So this is another project that we did. It was more of a research project. We didn't implement these, but we wrote extensively on it, and some of them are being still applied today. So color coding came out as an issue, and if I find time, I can talk about it later on because it's a topic on its own. Monochromicity was always a problematic for people, not being able to differentiate one element from another. So if you cannot see, then you cannot use the information. And we don't only use the information on signs, we also use the information of the building. For example, the door being a different color than the wall says that there's a passage there we can go through. So those type of like sameness is not good for environments. So a color difference to be provided. Contrast does not need to be extreme. Sometimes a small amount of contrast is also useful. And very interestingly, the floor finishes, light floor finishes, something like that. So this is going, this space is doing fine. But in transport environments, the light floor finishes came as something that especially visually impaired and elderly people wanted to have. Yes, about color differences, for example, this is the information that we need to perceive, like being able to see which step to to step on. So the issue there is, for visually impaired or elderly people, this is totally unperceivable. They cannot see where they should step on the escalator. So we found out that we had a very, very old escalator, which had a little green light underneath that, which was like coming to these spaces. And it was like brilliant. Everybody liked it because they could see. And they're like, oh, that's very nice. So it's like very simple thing that could change the lives of many and improve the quality of their experience in the space. Things like that, totally imperceivable. You cannot really see. You cannot use it. Glass is very problematic to use in public environments. So basically, for visually impaired people or for elderly people, it's just they won't go to that space at all. So I'll have other slides. Yes, light floors. It was quite interesting and nice to find out that many of us do wear a kind of darker clothes with dark shoes and dark bottoms and tops. So this like normal average people wearing clothes. So for visually impaired people, one of the problematic issues in transport environments was collisions with other people. So they didn't want to collide with somebody else, of course. And people are very, let's say, when you're in a hurry, you don't perceive your environment as you usually do. You don't see. You just move very quickly. So, so the collisions are often happening. And if the floors are light, visually impaired people could see somebody coming, approaching, because of the contrast of the floor to the people, and that was a very helpful thing for them to have. So we found that very interesting. Signage. Signage needs to be matte to avoid glare. Glare was very problematic. We all suffer from glare, but for visually impaired people and elderly people, they suffer from it more. They're more prone to glare. Backlit signage was very successful to be used. It was perceived much better than any other signage in the environment. And of course, green signs should be avoided because they're always often mixed up with the green fire exits. We have here one. So if you're using the same green, then the message is kind of mixed in the environment. So this Paddington station, I don't know if still there, but at the time that we were doing the research, there was a clinic stand, and there was all kind of other signs, and the clinic sign was like the one item that was seen the most in that complex environment because it was backlit. Of course, once we said that, over the years, now I'm seeing that everywhere is backlit in each environment because there's several years past. And when you recommend something, it kind of starts to be happening everywhere, which is very nice. But then again, now I'm questioning the amount of information in a built environment, because when everything is backlit, all of a sudden that's also a visual noise. It's also a complexity on its own. So you need to kind of be consistent and very selective in the information that needs to be presented in the built environment. So that's another thing maybe that requires further research at the time now. Yes. Of course, these type of information, the visually impaired people and elderly people were not being able to use them at all, cannot see the information there. But very problematic with those ceiling suspended, let's say, information is the glare that would come from artificial light or skylights that you cannot really comfortably use it. So floor-mounted information was much more preferred and used in those environments. As I said, glass partitions in public spaces and transport environments was very problematic. The manifestations on them needs to be continuous. because with different visual field loss, you cannot really see these manifestations. It needs to be continuous. Another thing is the glass. The way it's been seen by visually impaired people and elderly people is it's a blurry, not clear space. So their reaction to that is just staying away, which means that they're not using that space at all. The doors are not problematic because of the movement. Movement is something we can perceive much easier and better than color information. So the movement itself and the sound, they can say, oh, this is a door, and they can use it. So this area was okay, but this area, they weren't kind of approaching it at all. So I always say to my students and to everybody, like, just think twice if you're going to use glass partitions in a public space. Yes. From transport environments now to another one, hospitals, healthcare environments. I also had a chance to look at hospitals, both in the UK and in Turkey. And so the use of color in hospitals is the entrance area. I did work especially on non-clinical areas. So the idea was to improve quality experience of the patients in that environment. And it was based on a research study that found out that if patients were feeling good about their environments, and the good people didn't know then, so we tried to find what good is. Good in their environment, a good environment, let's say, were getting out of the hospital half a day earlier than usual, which means that they were getting less medication, they were getting better faster. So what happened, that was a big issue, and Department of Health wanted to look at it immediately to see if anything can be done to improve the environment for patients so that people would recover earlier and more easily. What we found out, we looked at area from area, and I did continue this research in this country as well, from entrance areas to circulation areas to ward areas. So in entrance areas, the important elements needs to be, of course, differentiated with color use, so we know what's important and understand it. Directional signs needs to be kept to a minimum. Otherwise, especially in a hospital, you get lost. There's too much information. And of course, a relaxing and calming area is also nice. So this was one of the better examples that we found, where information is kept to a minimum, important time and some information, differentiated with a different color, and having space and greenery and artworks, not in this picture, but it came out like in Turkey, the artworks was also important. They would like to have some sort of artworks in the environment as well. So with circulation areas, signage. The continuity in signage is very important. So usually in hospitals, because there are so many wings, the sign starts and between the signs there's like too much space, too many meters, let's put it that way, and people start to feel uncomfortable after a certain time if they don't get a feedback on the direction they are going. So continuity in signage was important. For wayfinding and zoning, when color is used for those purposes, color needs to be very limited. Actually, I always call it like, do not use more than 5 colors. We can only remember 3 of them anyway, mostly. 5 for some people. And those colors need to be very direct. I mean, you cannot really use something like a turquoise color because it's like neither green nor blue, and people can confuse it linguistically which color to use. So usually it's kind of like the main colors without any confusion and very limited use. We cannot kind of have like a 10 color scheme and kind of put different functions to it, like this is zone A, B, C, D, because people won't remember. People won't be able to use it. And also, the limit of use of color applies for the space itself also. If it's a zoning means that you're differentiating, for example, this building from the next building, and you call this zone A and zone B. Because they're very similar in architecture, people need something to differentiate the two. So it's the building with the pool in it, or the building with the Picasso in it, kind of things. The landmarks usually works. Color may also work, like a red building and a blue building. The idea there is, if you start to color the whole space, it loses its efficiency and effect. So my suggestion was always like color limits it. Like if it's a corridor, just color one wall of it. So constantly, because there's a white walls and one red wall, you'll be reminded of the redness of that space. Okay, otherwise you get used to that color and it's not different from the space anymore. And providing landmarks, as I said, is also a good idea. So what we are trying to say, a space like that with all the same colors, all yellows, floors, and this is something that people don't want and don't feel good about. It's very institutionalized, they found, and as opposed to, and the signage is too high and a similar color gets lost, too many clutter around and stuff like that, and the lighting doesn't help either. Yes. Yes. Yes. One of the better ways of using color, there are much better ones too. It's limitless, of course, the design is. You can go much better. But at least this is also monochromatic, what we call it. It uses blues only in the space. But with differences with the darkness and lightnesses of those blues, creates a kind of variety in itself and differentiates the information much more successfully than the previous example. With the care areas, of course, again, the overuse of any color becomes problematic in the long run. Like around 1950s or 40s, people in the UK said, okay, the pure white is very, very institutionalized. We don't like it in hospitals, so let's find another way. A very well-known colorist at the time suggested, okay, let's make it magnolia. So it has a slight tint of beige in it, which I think was a very correct thing to say at the moment. But then for the next 50 years, if you start painting all the hospitals in the same color, of course, then that color became the institutionalized color, and people were hating magnolia because it was like, oh, that's the hospital color. So there's kind of a thing about overusing something. So not any color should be overused to have any kind of strong connotations or associations with anything. And of course, we always need the material and color change for visual stimulation with the care areas. And yes, finally, I haven't looked at all the buildings yet, but I really, because every single building type has its own life to it and own considerations and the way the users use it and perceive it. So I came so far as to go with the school environments, learning environments, and some of my students will remember some of the pictures there because they're still working on it in general, and I did some research on it earlier on. Schools are also interesting. With children, color can elevate boredom and fear. So color can be used in schools or hospitals for children as well, because it elevates some of their boredom and fear. It provides visual interest, and it provides emotional outlets for children. So this is one of the classes again. So the research we done, we started out not with the classes, but actually how little kids, 7, 8-year-olds, could find their way in a school. Because if they find their way, they feel more comfortable and they like the environment. They feel that they're in control of the environment. It's very important for young children. So we looked at if we can improve the wayfinding and kind of familiarity with the environment, but with the use of color in the school environments. So we found that yes, color can improve children's wayfinding. The interesting thing is we just simply asked them to find a way from A to B in an unfamiliar environment. And we did it like with this time, gray worked as a control group because it was a big space and because we used little boxes. Let me see. Yes, those boxes. So we had like gray boxes. They weren't really big to provide a landmark or a huge thing. So we kind of provide like something that's there, but not dominating the space. And we found like we had a gray road, and then the next week we'll change with different kids. We always use different kids. So they won't learn this way with different colors, and then we repeat it with cold colors and warm colors and stuff. So it was quite interesting with the gray boxes where they didn't really see them in the environment. They were there, but they weren't really perceiving them or using them, it turned out, as a wayfinding tool. They were using things like the fire extinguishers, which was red. So they were still using information, color information from objects in the space, but not necessarily the ones that we put there. Or something on the board like a poster or something. So that was interesting to see. Once we put the colored boxes, they started to use them, and there was much of an improvement. Then we went further on to understand, like, is there a specific color that would be more beneficial or more memorable that could stay in the mind than some other colors, but it didn't turn out that way. So basically, like anything else in the literature, they were remembering the first one and the second one and the last one. So that's like very consistent with the literature about memory issues, things with different things. You always remember the first thing, the second thing, and the last thing. So that was kind of consistent with that, but not necessarily kind of specific color, like it didn't really matter if I put red or yellow, but there was a huge difference between not having any color and having a color, so which was also very nice to learn about. So color could be very interesting to learn. So yes, in public spaces, I had a chance to work more on public spaces. The small home private spaces are kind of relatively new to me. But for public spaces, what I could say is, of course, color can help the improved ambience and quality experience of a space. And color can come in different forms. It can be paint, it can be an artwork, it can be a material, but it needs to be changed. We don't want to live in monochromatic areas. So it can be appealing, safe, stress-reducing environments could be designed. Ease of navigation, wayfinding, and communication of information is possible with color, which exactly is with color coding and signage. And of course, it helps a lot with especially visually impaired people and elderly people and children. So accessibility and inclusiveness issues also could be, to a certain extent, solved with color design. And this is pretty much the end of my presentation. So, well, thank you all again for listening. Yeah.
Thank you, that was fascinating actually. Mentioning the Scandinavians being depressed made me think, because I'm interested in Vikings as a medieval historian. When the Viking violence, the violent behaviour,
I don't know.
you mention that as another sort of result of monochromacity in prisons. So maybe there's some research there for historians, I don't know. But I have many questions, but I shall offer questions to the floor first. I'm sure you have some questions for Dr. Olguntürk. Anyone wish to start us off?
Yes.
Are you involved in any such public projects in Turkey? And what is the state of interaction between, I don't know, people who make the buildings and people like you who research and usability?
Well, to a certain extent, what happens in Turkey is you, as a consultancy, but not as a consultancy in the sense we don't get, in the UK we were getting projects. So you were getting like I had a Department of Health project was for a year, the Department of Transport project was for 2 years, and then I had another Department of Health project for 10 years. So you had like those kind of projects coming to you, where and the Home Office was like, that was almost endless because we started one prison and then it was 6, and I was like, keep coming, like, could you do that too? But it was like a proper project where you do the work, you do the project, and consultancy, you get paid for it, the university cuts some of it and stuff like that, so it works like that. But here you still do consultants, but not on a project base. So what you do is there are regulations, building regulations, and also standards, Turkish standards. So they usually come to you for görüş meaning like your views, so you comment on them and send them back. They sometimes use it, sometimes don't. For accessibility, it comes regularly to our department. I'm not the only person, so 2-3 of us are there. So for accessibility, we had the standards coming into our department. And color standards, we don't yet have it here. And hospitals works, they do those for TÜBİTAK projects and stuff. They come and ask you if that project is worth, funding or not. So you get involved in that. But not in terms of government or private sector giving you projects per se, not yet at that stage. So, yes. Is there any other questions? Yes. Yes. Yes, yeah, I can go back. Mm-hmm. Yeah, with that one, sorry, I need to go back. Yes, the methods I use usually in my research are very direct. Observations, sometimes I do observations as well. It depends on the space, really. Every space is kind of different. Like reaction times, yes. Now we're working on shop environments and how color could the color in the shop could change the impulsive, let's say, buying of people in the clothes stores. So yes, in that time, yes, we're timing now. Like it's all observation, all timing. So we're like timing, like how many items they are touching. We are observing. We are the reaction times. So it kind of the time spent is important there. Like how much time does that person spend in that shop? So yes, for that environment, yes, that makes sense. We had another we also had an airport, another researcher, it's not here, and that was about wayfinding only, so they were kind of going inside the airport, Esenboğa airport, and finding their way. And for that, we had to find something like a hesitation time where people, every time they make a wayfinding choice, if they hesitate too much, we would say, like, why is that, and can't you find, I mean, that was important for us, so they were kind of having those hesitation time and reaction time. See that if it's a hesitation or just a natural reaction. With this one, it was kind of more, the image was there, so like, could you please associate and we did presence test. It's computer-based, and that the participants felt present in the room, which was a very good thing. We achieved that. And there's like, okay, could you just associate it? We didn't really want to talk or do it with words, because that's kind of tricky too. So just kind of like with those, yes, this one. So they were like viewing this, and they were just simply signing, which, and we didn't even have those. We just had the pictures. We didn't have the words either. So it's only the pictures. And it's a method used in psychology anyway, so they're just kind of associating them with. We didn't want to have this Turkish language or English language differences or anything that would come from the words. So they were just seeing the image and not just directly associating them. So that was the method, yes.
Kind of goes beyond, in a sense, what you're doing, because you're interested in the effect it has on people. But have you read about sort of the reasons why we have these different emotional responses to certain colours and so on? I mean, I'm wondering, is it just because we associate red with blood or something which is negative, and blue with the nice sky, or is there something to do with the way our eyes, I mean, we go to our psychology.
They probably know it better.
Our eyes kind of receive the colours and then process them to the brain or something like that, right? Because even understanding that process would help a little bit putting certain colours together or something, I suppose. And as a footnote to my question, I read reports in a newspaper years ago now, a few years ago, some researcher had said the reason why men like blue and girls like pink is because when we were hunter-gatherers, the men were looking at the horizon of the sky, looking for the animals, and the ladies were picking the berries, which are kind of... Now, I thought that sounds a bit silly, so I don't know. I just threw that one as a footnote to that.
Well, to your comment, some colorists depend on actually in kind of the evolutionary way that as you can picking up berries and looking at the horizon, I wouldn't know that. But there's something like with the red, which I can go with those explanations really. So with the red is something, the connotations, yes, there's blood, like passion, love, and things like that. So, and these are kind of like universal. So it's kind of red becomes something like, oh, stop, there's something there type of thing. I mean, it can be very positive, it can be very negative, but it's kind of like it's maybe also linked because red as a hue, not as a light, but as a color hue, object color, let's put it that way, because light behaves differently, advances in our visual field too. So if you have like a blue-colored paper and a red-colored paper at the same place, you visually see the red. You would think that the red is more nearer to you. So all those, like, they're all linked. So I wouldn't think that there's only one explanation. The blue is very interesting, and the blue is called 7 and blue phenomenon in psychology. So if anywhere in the world you just ask people which color you like most, the most answer you get is blue, which is. And 7, which number you like is 7. No explanation, we don't know. But that's why it's called a phenomenon, blue and 7 phenomenon. But the interesting there is, of course, there's the blue skies and the sea, and sometimes being regarded as calming and stuff. And interestingly, it's the advancing color as light. So if you had a blue light and a red light, now you see the blue light coming closer in your visual field. So from lighting perspective. So yes, there's more about issues that comes from generations of information being passed to another generation. And the nature, I think, has a big role to it, what we see in the nature. And also our visual mechanism. So they all go together, I guess, yes.
Okay, I'd like to thank Dr. Olguntürk again. I'll just briefly say that we will be back again next semester with 3 more library lectures, and I'd like to thank Ulku and Burcu and the other members of the library team who put these talks together, because I just do a bit of talking and then I go away, they do all the hard work. And to wish all the students here good luck in your exams, and a happy new year to everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So
now I'm thinking the Vikings were violent because they had this, and it's possible.